Welcome back on the AM show, and you know we do this together. Bernice, Abu-Baidoo, Lansah, and I. A very good morning to you, Bernice.
Good morning, Benjamin, and good morning to you. Thank you for joining
your
our program this
curry
morning.
colored outfit with your green and gold brooch and your swagalicious watch.
You're mischievous, you. So mischievous.
I see the debt exchange has not hit. It hasn't hit you yet. The majority leader says it could wipe out the middle class, and that was telling. But let's get into that conversation. Our very first big story. It has to do with the debt exchange program. And well, government says it is extending the deadline to the end of January the 31st to be specific. The minority is saying, scrap it all together, let it go. You remember the discourse on the e-levy and how it went and how government maneuvered its way. The question is, can they do same this time around? Well, joining us for that conversation, we have some stalwarts from the economic and finance space and legal space as well. Akakpo is a lawyer and he is representing a caucus of those individual bondholders. We also have Joe Jackson, Director of Strategy and Business Operations at Daylex Finance, joining the conversation. Let's start the conversation from the legal end. Akakpo joins the conversation. Mr. Akakpo, I think it's only fitting to start by saying Happy New Year to you, sir.
Many happy returns, Ben.
And it's good to...
Many happy returns. We hope for the best for this year, even though it doesn't look like it's going to be a very good year because the statistics are grim and the projections are very tight. But let's see.
Well, at least we can be optimistic. Let's wait and see. Just today, I was looking at the graphic business. Banks to suffer a 65 billion Ghana cedi loss, cedi under pressure, inflation still to go up. But minimum...
Tariffs gone up.
Tariffs have gone up, 20-something% for electricity, 8.3 or so % for water. But let's see how we maneuver our way. We also have Joe Jackson from Daylex Finance joining us via the phone lines. Mr. Jackson, Happy New Year. Good morning to you.
A happy and a prosperous New Year.
Thank you for joining the conversation. Let's start with Mr. Akakpo on what has been happening so far. I found it curious the other day when you spoke about the debt exchange and mentioned that, look, typically, like we say in our local parlance, Bernice, in other words, if your neighbor's beard is on fire, you get water and put it by your side. You read that piece from what the program has and indicated that even those with treasury bills could be affected. So break it down for us. What is your standpoint in terms of the debt exchange program, the caucus you're representing? Why are you still lagging behind in accepting the program?
Great. Okay. So, Mr. Akakpo, the thing is that, you see, the program is, in respect of the individual bondholders, it's actually not necessary. We don't need to rope in individual bondholders in order to have a successful IMF program. Not at all. Look, we're saying that if you look in the budget, and then one other preliminary fact, what we've done is that the groups are coming together. So the association, that's Individual Bondholders Association, that's a group I'm leading, and the one senior who is leading the forum, that's Individual Bondholders Forum. We've merged so that we can present one unified front. Good. So for practical purposes now, we're working together. Good. So we're saying that it's unnecessary to pull in individual bondholders because if you look at the economic consequences that this program is going to impact on these individuals, you just find that it's not worth it at all. We'll come into those details. Now, so why don't we have to add them? If you look in the budget, you find lots of money. Let's start. The budget says that we'll spend 27 billion on capital expenditure. So one of our main arguments is that spending 27 billion on capital expenditure means that the recurrent expenditure is sorted. That's the one to pay government salaries, run all the government offices, the public officers pay their salaries, etc. That's sorted. So if that is sorted, then pay individual bondholders too before you go to capital expenditure. Because for the individual bondholders, the coupons, the interest that are usually paid periodically, 6 months, etc., that is also salary to us. So I'm sure we've made the point several times over that individual bondholders rely on the coupon to live. The coupons give us a living. Why? Because that is what we use in paying rent, school fees, medications, etc., etc. So the bond program the government is proposing, this domestic debt exchange, will totally wipe us out. And you see, you actually mentioned it, that Oseche Mensah said it will wipe out the middle class. Why? Because this year, under the proposed program, not even 1 cedi of interest will be paid. Not even 1 cedi for your packet, not even one will be paid this year. And so how are we going to live? How are we going to pay the bills? And then for next year, they propose to pay 5% interest, just 5%. When the coupons usually have about 20%, there's 19.5%, 16.5%, and so on and so forth. So if you ask somebody to bring in his bond, to take one that he will not get 1 cedi this year by way of interest, and then for next year, get just 5% interest. And then number 3, the maturity date for the bonds are being extended up to 2033 and 2038. Naturally, a rational human being will not take it, especially where there is a lot of money in the budget.
I get the point you're making, and no one would want not to get the interest on their hard-earned money, so to speak. But let's assume some of these people have earned profits on their deposits for quite a while. Making these sacrifices, as some people have hinted, wouldn't break the bank. Some have said that, look, it's a hit that we're all taking to save our country, to save Ghana, especially as we go for an IMF program. If we're not debt sustainable, we cannot get the program. And the likes of Gabi Otridako have hinted that, look, if we don't do this, the consequences could be worse. All of what you have, these bonds, could actually be worthless. How do you react to that?
Look, you know what? You see, I'm at a loss for words. I don't even know how to begin. Look, you see, Gabi's statement, let me put it very mildly this way. That statement shouldn't be coming from Gabi. You see, sometimes you look at the messenger, who should carry the message. Gabi should be the last person to carry that message. Because, you see, Gabi has been a huge beneficiary of this administration. He has made tons of cash. So Gabi is not the right person.
Do you have evidence to that effect? Do you have evidence to that effect?
Oh, the evidence is out there. Did you see PDS? His firm was acting for government. He was paid hundreds of thousands, wasn't he? That's just a tip of the iceberg. You see, Gabi won't even be happy that Mr. Akakpo, you'll be asking more questions for that to say more. He'll be like, oh, Ben, you're spoiling my case. So maybe Gabi will be content for us to just say that he's made lots of money without going to detail.
I think he would also want me to be fair to him.
Coming from Gabi,
and not let you go get away with that without probing further, which is why I'm asking the questions. And if you know anything, of course, I mean, well, you would have to put it out there.
Yeah. Yes, Mr. Akakpo. So I mentioned PDS, where the documents are publicly available. You see his law firm in there. And they made a tidy sum. I'll just leave it at that. I don't need to. There are certain things in law, we call them res ipsa. I'm sure viewers will be like, hey, Mr. Akakpo, this devil's advocate here, just abandon it. So you let me leave it at the PDS matter. Just move on. So for somebody who made that money, at least from the PDS, when he comes to deliver such a message, it rather increases the anger. It enrages people because they're like, wow, you are making money and you are asking us to starve. So you see that he's not the right person to send such a message. I think in future, it will be better he doesn't comment on these matters like this. Yes, it will just be better.
Okay,
right. So Mr. Akakpo, you remember I mentioned that
Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Hello. Yeah, you remember, and one of the questions you started with, look, this situation is not as bad as government is making it look like. And that's how come I found a statement in the bond program that they may even extend it to treasury bills. Very arrogant. It's just as if we can't read. So it's like to say that this domestic debt exchange does not extend to treasury bills, but they will come to treasury, they may come from time to time. It's as if we cannot read, we can't analyze for ourselves. Why? What's going wrong? What will happen if Ghana doesn't do much infrastructure projects this year? People have to live first before they think about more roads and more schools. If the situation is that dire, what you do, according to Article 36, is that secure livelihoods first. Secure livelihoods first before you say you want to build more roads, you want to build other infrastructure. So it's showing that government lacks priority, can't prioritize what we need. But Article 36 of the Constitution says no.
Right.
Do it in this manner. By all means, we should develop. But when we are developing, we should make, so what will be, there's a better welfare than making sure that people who are owed money and which money they use to pay their bills should be paid to them. So Article 36(1) says we should have maximum development, but make sure that there is maximum welfare, there is freedom, happiness, and government should secure the livelihoods of the people. So that is the point. So once we rely on the coupons to be able to make a living, it doesn't lie in the mouth of government to take away these coupons just in the name of going to spend 27 billion on capital expenditure. No, and everybody said it, even apart from the economics, the economists, the what do you call it, the experts. It's clear to us as ordinary people that government has to cut down expenditure. Government has to cut. Government just has to cut expenditure. You don't even need the economic professor, Professor Peter Corte, Bobkin, and all those people to come and say, "Oh, we are human. We all can understand."
So that's an interesting point you make. Let me quickly bring in. Just hold for me, Mr. Kwebu. Let me bring in Joe Jackson, Director of Strategy and Business Operations at Daylex Finance, and just taking off from where Mr. Kwebu left off. He says we should rein in spending, and you would see that per what documentation you put out there from the 2023 budget. I'm just going to your Twitter page. You look at what January to December we're expected to spend in this year, and we're looking at expenditure of 205.4 billion. Yet you look at total revenue and grants, 144 billion, leaving a deficit of 61.4 billion. It would appear that we are not cutting our coat according to our cloth. You look at that, the deficit for 2022, 58.7. We are even going higher. You look at the deficit for 2022, January to September, comparatively, and it appears that we're still not reining our borrowing in, our debt in. Maybe not borrowing because we've been cut out of the market. Add that to the fact that the Ghana Association of Bankers is directing commercial banks not to sign on to the amended debt exchange offer. What can you tell us about the debt exchange situation, and is government getting it right, Mr. Jackson?
Thank you, sir. Listen, for starters, the biggest problem we have now is that the government is not cutting expenditure. Like Martin is saying, and Martin, hello, good morning and good to hear from you. Martin is saying this morning, you don't need to be a rocket scientist to be able to say to the government, why are you not cutting expenditure? Because for so long as you don't cut expenditure, it's very hard to go out there and tell an individual, a bank, or to take the losses. It's almost as if the pain has to be borne by everybody else except those who are benefiting from this government. That's ridiculous. That's absolutely ridiculous. And you can see that that particular reference you're making on my Twitter page is Get real. Let's be real. The government owes. The government cannot pay, not in full and on time like it's signed up for. First of all, you negotiate. You show you are contrite. You cut expenditure. And then you go on and say, I've done all I can. Let's sit down and negotiate how you can also contribute to this problem. But you can't sit the same way, borrow another 61 billion. And bear in mind, right, that even as we speak, each week the government is borrowing. And because it is so desperate and all it can do is borrow from treasury bills, the treasury bill rate is going higher and higher and higher. We are now at effective rate of 38% per annum. Where are we going? And if there's anything that we must do at this moment is take an act to that expenditure. Take an act to the expenditure. We are not living within our means. It doesn't make sense. We are not being real. We are tied to pet projects that don't make sense. Especially in a looming economic meltdown. Do we need a debt exchange program? Yes, we do. Our government has borrowed in our name more than it can. Should individuals bear the brunt? That's the question we should be asking. Should corporates bear the brunt? That's the question we should be asking. But whatever it is, you can't say, present a program and say, take it or leave it. You just can't do that, especially when you have not cut things to the bone. It's almost as if we are caught in a situation where the powers that be, they don't hear the rest of us. The powers that be only hear themselves. And as much as all of us, and I'm the first to raise my hand and say, not getting debt sustainability is going to be a dire situation. Yet I'm saying we have to negotiate our way to what is required. Right. We have to agree on how the bill is going to be paid and who is going to pay the bill.
Right. And that is the thorny, situation we find ourselves in. That's the bone of contention. But you would also admit that government has postponed the deadline from last year into this year. It's postponed again to the end of the month, supposedly to dialogue on some of these issues. But I'd like your reaction to the Ghana Association of Banks saying or directing banks, commercial banks, not to sign on to the amended debt exchange program. What does that mean if the Association of Banks itself is coming out to say this? We've heard from Senor Hosi and his group saying individual bondholders and others don't sign on to it. But for the Association of Banks to do this, what are the implications on the debt exchange program?
Well, first of all, you have to remember that the Association of Banks has an interest in keeping this country stable and did not take that decision lightly. There are men of integrity at the helm of affairs. What you're saying is that, effectively, that this is going to bring chaos to the financial sector and that there's not enough clarity about the stability fund that is supposed to help mitigate the effects. And also the government is not cutting expenditure enough. You can't expect the financial sector to bear the brunt of events of the pain when you are not reining in your spending. And you see, there's even a credibility gap here. This is a government where we've been screaming for years. Reduce the size of government. Reduce your appointees. Reduce the the size of government, and we've said it over and over and over again, and it just falls on deaf ears. The question is, why? How can you sell this austerity, this pain, to sections of the public when you yourself seem adamant that you don't want to take any pain? The Association of Banks just says that no, this is too much pain, and it's going to create chaos and devastate the financial sector, and you've got to look at it again. Remember also that each time the government has engaged, it's because it was forced to the table. Until the individual individual bondholders formed groups, had anybody engaged with them? No. Even as we speak, has there been any engagement? Martin is here. Martin can tell us. So the challenge we have is, you're saying that an individual bondholder should contribute to paying the bill. Okay. Have you sat down with them, or a section of them, or with some representative or some leader to say, this is what is happening, and this is what you want to do, and what do you also want in exchange, or how best can we structure this? No, the program was presented. Am I surprised that it's been postponed again? No, because there was no consultation. And remember, in all this, we are also all clear that you cannot force somebody to fight. You know, all you can do is to threaten hellfire and damnation when there's an economic meltdown. But you cannot say, I should fight. There's no legal basis for this. You can only appeal, you can only beg, you can only negotiate. And yet somehow that's not what we're seeing, and that's the problem.
We've been joined now by Dr. Theo Champon, political risk analyst. But before I come to you, there was a question on my mind for Lawyer Akakpo, and Mr. Joe Jackson threw that in during his submission. Mr. Akakpo, government has cited further engagement with individual and institutional investors as a reason for the extension of its deadline. Have you been contacted in any way? And are you meeting government anytime soon?
Yeah. Good morning, Bernice. Good to see you. You look good.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So, Bernice, we haven't been contacted yet. We are hoping that should be done in the coming days, so that we can get this done and over with very soon. Because, you know, the more these delays, the more it gives us a lot of stress. People can't sleep. People need their money quickly to, you know, be able to buy medication, to be able to pay school fees. So we need to do this real quick. The government has to be faster than it currently is. Kukwasa game has stopped, because these are livelihoods that are being impacted. You see what I keep saying, Bernice? These guys have made tons of money, so they don't feel our pain, and they are being slow, extremely slow. Government needs to put its act together and quicken the pace, because lives are being impacted.
Mr. Akakpo, let me bring in Dr. Theo Champon now. So this is where we are. From an extension of a deadline to the 16th of January, there's been another extension to the 31st. From what we've gleaned so far, government is yet to contact these bondholders. And one would have expected that at least there would have been some conversation even before the announcement of the deadline. The individual bondholders appear adamant. I'm not sure that they are willing to compromise at any point, even if they will. And obviously, the pensions are out of the way now. What are the options for government? What can it do to achieve its aim of getting our debt at a sustainable level so that we can get the IMF deal?
I mean, good morning. The first thing is the whole process has been badly managed and mangled from the start. When the government, because or true of its quote unquote, I know it all attitude, attempted to force this restructuring exercise on the various categories of investors or bondholders without first properly consulting them, and made the whole thing look like take it or leave it. And of course, like Martin and Joe have said, these are people's livelihoods that are at stake here. So naturally, there would be a pushback, and we've seen a strong pushback against this domestic debt restructuring. Remember that this is the fourth extension we're talking about here. And I don't even think that that is going to be the end. I think even the government will struggle to meet the 31st January deadline, largely because you now have like entrenched positions on these issues. And I think the extent of the cuts that we're talking about here, between 60 and 80% implied haircuts on people's savings, it's quite dire, because originally they were going to exchange this for just 4 separate instruments. Now we're talking about 12 instruments going as far as 2038, when some of these people would have been long dead and gone. And so, look, there are really serious issues at stake here. I think what the government ought to do is to go back to the drawing board, right, as part of the consultations. The first thing is that the 55% debt to GDP ratio that they want to attain by 2028 is just not possible. It's too drastic a cut, and that is going to impose heavy losses on various categories of investors. So it's to see if we can actually push that number a little bit rather outward. So what I mean by that is that we're not talking about 55% debt to GDP in 2028 or in the next 4 or 5 years, but rather maybe we're talking about 2032, almost like a 10-year program. And what that entails is you need to sit down with all categories of stakeholders, including the main opposition, the NDC, because there's no guarantee that this government would maybe be the one that will be in charge of the economy in the next couple of years. And you need that broad buy-in as part of that engagement process. So the two really point I'm making here is that, one, the deadlines are likely to be extended again because they wouldn't get the 80% to so uptake. Number two, the 55%, the aggressive ceilings that they want to attain, perhaps they need to go back to the IMF and think about extending it further, maybe by about 10 years. And what that naturally implies is that you need to have all the stakeholders, including the main opposition, at the table to buy in and say, look, this is what, as a country, collectively, we are going to do for the next 10 years to rebuild this economy back. Other than that, I don't see any way out. And that is further going to add to more uncertainty with the economy.
Pebu, yesterday, we heard you on the news speaking to the Garman chair, trying to get him to speak on your behalf for government to exclude individual bondholders from this. The finance minister says, look, we want to engage further with all stakeholders. At this point, what is your stance? Are you willing to compromise at any point for anything? Or just like the pensioners and the pension fund managers and owners or subscribers, it's a no-no for you?
Yes, Bernice, the last one is an absolute no, 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 because we've already suffered enough. You remember in 2022, through the finance minister's mismanagement of the economy, our CD plummeted. We are also suffering the cost of living crisis. Food prices more than doubled, etc. So we are all burden sharing, and so that is sufficient. Another reason we say no, no, no is that, as a result of the depreciation and other factors, right now, as we speak, research shows that we've lost between 50 and 80% of the value of these bonds. Yes, Bernice, between 50 and 80% of the value of these bonds have been wiped off. So what again does the finance minister want? You see? So the finance minister forgets that maybe because he's made hundreds of millions, and this one, Bernice, it's also public record, through Data Bank, which is significantly owned by the finance minister and his friends, they have made money from every borrowing, from every loan we have taken, these bonds. So finance minister, his friends, and President Akufo-Addo's family are now the rich guys in town. So it actually lies ill in the mouth of the finance minister to continue to say we have to sacrifice. Maybe the starting point will be for them to return the commissions and all the money they've made off the bonds. Then people will be willing to sacrifice. But for as long as finance minister and President Akufo-Addo and their family keep the hundreds of millions of cedis they've made from the bonds, no, there's no way anybody will sacrifice any further. We can't be in a crater. They've pushed us into this deep crater, and they are now the rich guys in town, and they want to kill us further. No. Bernice, like I said before, it's not as if we enjoy saying that we should be left, we should be exempted. That's not it. It's not just for the fun of it. As I explained earlier, the coupons are actually our salaries. The coupons, that's the interest payments that are made, are what we depend on to live. That is what we use to pay the bills, school fees, food, rent, etc., etc., right? So it's not as if we just save the money for the sake of saving. No, without this money, millions of our fellow citizens, we are going to die. More businesses are going to collapse. Look, Bernice, the situation is dire. It's really horrendous. So that's how come I find it shocking that the finance minister is still, digging in his heels, and they are saying we should come and negotiate. Look, all this, they're just prolonging our pain and killing more people.
The lawyer, there's no point of you meeting government then. If your stance is no, there's no point of engagement for you, is there?
Well, because they've said we should come, by all means, we have to go there and repeat the arguments. Yes, we have to go there and repeat it, because if we don't go, it will be easier for them to say, oh, you never turned up. So We'll go there and repeat the argument. As I said, the strategy they are using is just a non-starter. They should just cut our pain, and government should also cut its losses by just announcing a reversal. Don't take us through any more pain than we've already suffered. People are dying. Look, Bernice, this thing is really killing people, eh? No, you should see our WhatsApp groups on the individual bondholders WhatsApp groups. People can't sleep. People are getting palpitations.
Martin, I have a quick.
Is there.
I have a quick interjection for you. So the pensioners cried foul and they were taken off. Now, individual bondholders, you're saying we can't stomach this. If you're taking off, where does government go? Where should government go?
Excellent, Mr. Akakpo. It's all in the budget. It's all in the budget. Like the way we say, book no lie. Thankfully, the budget is a public document. So in the budget, you find that we intend to spend 27 billion on capital expenditure. That's more roads, more other infrastructure projects. That is what we are saying we should cut down. Mr. Akakpo, last year, we spent 15 billion on capital expenditure. Yes, 1.5. So what would be wrong if this year we spend the same 1.5? What would be wrong? But as you've seen, if you look at the budget, this year we intend to spend more than last year. You see why total expenditure is going to 205 billion? And you see that last year, domestic revenue, right? So the taxes, aid and grants, we got 65 billion. This year, we are projecting to raise 143 billion. We should be able to pay. We should be able to pay. And let me add this. For two of the bonds, they actually have a constant stream of income. So it's not as if government is now going to find money from elsewhere to come and pay. No. The Dachi bond and the ESLA bonds were designed in such a way that there's a constant stream of income. So for the ESLA bond, that income is the energy sector levy. every liter of petrol or diesel or the other fuels you buy, there is an energy sector levy that you pay. And so that is what is used to be able to retire those bonds. So, Mr. Akakpo, as we talk now, there are people at the filling stations buying fuel. Tomorrow, people will buy. Next month, people will buy, and so on and so forth. So it tells you that that money has not yet arrived, right? So if the government has not made that money, how can you say that money that has not yet come into the kitty, you've already spent it? It's as if we can't read. It's an insult to our intelligence. Then you go to the Dachi bond. That one too, we pay taxes to be able to retire it. That's the get fund tax, the 2.5% for education. That was what was used to design that bond. So that as we buy items that have VAT on them, the VAT, that component, the 2.5 is gathered and used to retire that bond. So you see that government statement that if we don't do this domestic debt exchange, the economy will collapse. At least it's totally false when it comes to the individual bondholders. It's false.
Okay.
Mr. Akakpo,
right.
Article 36, let's read Article 36, secure livelihoods. Secure livelihoods before capital expenditure. That's what the Constitution requires of us. We can't run away.
Dr. Theo Champong, so, I mean, this comes down to real people and the impact this is going to have on individuals and their families. As we speak now, from the 1st of February, there's going to be an increment in utility tariffs, okay? We've heard from the IMF talk about what this year is going to look like for many economies, predicting recession and all that. Here we are, we find ourselves in a fix. Government needs to ensure that our debt is sustainable so that we can get a deal. Government was hoping to do that by first quarter of 2023. From the way things are looking, it doesn't look good. We've heard from the director of ISEL who says, look, even the current form of the debt exchange will collapse many banks, and that is not a good sign for our economy. So where do we go from here? Government is in a fix. Like Lawyer Akakpo suggested, cut down expenditure, cut down your projects and other monies you're hoping to spend on projects and all that. What should be the posturing of government, and how soon should they make a decision on this, seeing all the background that I have set, especially for how this year is going to look like on the economic front?
The posturing of a government in a crisis should one that tries to communicate the extent of the mess, one, tries to burden share, two, and tries to carry the people along in the process. It shouldn't be one that makes it look as though you either take what I have on the table or not. And that is what we have been seeing all throughout. And it shouldn't also be one that attempts to make it look as though there is even no crisis, at all. And you're very right. The issues we're talking about here are extremely consequential, not only for the banks or the financial institutions, because clearly, if the proposed debt exchange program goes ahead in its current form, some of the institutions may not survive. And I choose my words very carefully here. But it also impacts households and individuals, just like Martin has explained. So what the government ought to do is to be magnanimous in its communication, but also to go back to the fundamentals, i.e., the budget that they had actually put out there. And here maybe, Martin, a little bit of a correction. In terms of the revenue numbers, last year, we actually got a little over 100 billion, not 60. But that's beside the point. The main point is that the government says that
talking about the domestic taxes. The domestic taxes, we raised 65. Yeah, 65. I'm talking about domestic tax, a constant one.
That's fine. But the government wants to increase the total revenues and grants by about 49% this year, from that 100 to 144. At the same time, they want to increase expenditure by 130, or from 137 to 205 billion. That's about 51% increase. And this is where I support the core. And in fact, some of us have been leading this call for about 2-3 years now, for the government to cut back on some of the, non-priority expenditure in the budget. Because in a crisis, you need to show that you are also doing your bit. A lot of the
Dr. Champong, quick intervention. What are some of those non-priority areas that we could safely cut off and save the country some cost in terms of what we are seeing?
So let's take the line or the expenditure line items one by one, right? If you take the interest expense, that one is something we have to service, and even this year they made a provision for that of about 50-something billion. But then you also have a lot of state-owned enterprises. Some of them, in fact, have been loss-making for several years now, right? You do have some of them with 2, 3 deputies and the likes. Take the Office of Government Machinery and all the institutions underneath them. In fact, for some of them, even their budget lines compared to 2019, compared to 2020, and compared to last year, is actually gone up, right, on a year-on-year basis. So there are specific line items on the expenditure side of the equation that I think we can actually deal with. A number of the so-called flagship initiatives and interventions can further be realigned. We've talked about the capital expenditure budget, where we're looking to increase from 15-16 billion to about 27 billion amidst the crisis. I mean, that's a no-brainer in my view. You need to stick within the numbers and the budget lines that you think you can realistically meet. And that's where I think that the answer to this is to go back and rework the numbers in terms of the budget. Because even from where I sit, I don't see us meeting a number of the targets in the 2023 budget. And that could even add further pressure on the already dire state of affairs. But it's all about government posturing in this instance, and that's where the whole sort of I know it all attitude or approach, they need to tone down a little bit, and they need to constructively engage Ghanaians. But the last point, and this goes back to what I started with in my first remarks, is that the aggressive the cuts that we're expecting to bring the debt numbers down to 55% of GDP by 2028 is just not going to be possible in the current form. So we'll have to go back to the table and think about maybe 60, maybe 65, thereabouts, and that then creates a bit of breathing room for the people or the domestic debt holders that are agitating. And remember that, again, we have not even talked about the external debt restructuring in this instance, which is also another complicated exercise on its own. So ultimately, from where I sit, I don't think those first quarter February sort of dates that some people in government are talking about getting the fund program going is likely to be met. It's going to be slightly further down the line.
Let me come to the studio and Dr. I almost
Mr. Joe Jackson.
Joe Jackson has joined us.
I think we could award him
an honorary
doctorate.
I mean, just looking at the front page of the graphic business, and you just get disheartened by what you read on it. So banks suffer 65 billion CD losses, CD under pressure, debt exchange uncertainty bites hard, inflation to gallop this month. Mr. Jackson, should government just consider scrapping this whole debt exchange program altogether? And what are the options of getting us to a level where we can reach the IMF due? Because clearly, from the bit of it,
is that even a possibility
yes.
to scrap this?
Scrap it altogether.
Is it a possibility?
Look at that? Because it appears, like you said, you were not surprised about the extension. The pensioners and the fund managers for the pension schemes managed to get government to change its mind. Now it's looking like the bondholders are also going to, individual bondholders are also going to get what they want. They don't want to be a part of this. What are the options for government? Should we be looking at totally just forgetting about this whole debt exchange program? And what else can we do?
Okay. For starters, we can't forget about the debt exchange program. Simply because when you look, if you start from the premise that we can't pay our bills and that we should start cutting cost, then what are the two biggest single line items we have? One is salaries, and the other is the servicing of our debt. Now, the whole point of the debt exchange program is to negotiate and bring that bill, the interest on our debt, into a place where it starts to make sense and we can. So you need some relief. That is what we're going to try and do with the external debtors, and that is in theory what we're trying to do with the domestic debt. The challenge though you have is you can't on one hand come to me and say, effectively, I should give up some of my revenue. I should give up some of my liquidity.
Which is basically what they're asking people to do.
Exactly. If you, listen, if think about it in two ways. If this year my bond is maturing, you are spreading it until 2033. 10 years from now, before you pay. You pay in bits and pieces when I was going to get the money in bulk this year. To make it worse, this year you're paying zilch, zero. So you are causing me a lot of pain. Now, I don't want to get to the emotional part about people dying, about drugs, and sometimes it does color the argument, but there are real people and there are real issues behind it. But put that one aside. Whatever it is, someone who gave you his money legally is being told that he's not getting it and he's taking a lot of pain. That's why the banks are here. The banks are not saying that, the banks are saying that what you're doing is going to cause me losses.
In fact, the Ghana Association of Bankers is calling on people not to sign onto the
think about it,
this
right?
agreement.
Think about it. As an institution, you will say, okay, this year I'm going to have these bills due. And I have put aside some money by planning in a bond that will mature this year. I'll get the money and I'll pay. You're not going to get that money.
But Joe, the lawyer Matthew Pebu, who represents the coalition, is saying that they're not willing to compromise. It's a no-no for them. And the bankers are also saying, look, don't do this. So what can government do? And that's why I was asking, the debt exchange program, if we still go that route.
Yes, but let's look at it this way. You have to reduce the cost of servicing your debt, right? Mm-hmm. But you have to take the pain first. The problem is this, that the person who can't pay, who is saying take some pain, is spending more, is borrowing more.
And that's where the devil is.
And that's
what we're pointing out, because we're spending some 61 billion Ghana
Thank you.
In excess.
And we're spending more on infrastructure. Now, the issue is that, and let's bear this in mind. In theory, the money was borrowed for the whole of Ghana. It was sovereign debt. It was not an individual's debt. Every time that borrowing happened, Parliament approved. Now, we could, of course, argue this ad infinitum, but that's not the point. So now sometimes the question comes that, shouldn't we have a say in how this debt restructuring is going to be? Shouldn't we have a say in who bears which part of the pain? Why is it that up until now, it was really the corporates who are bearing the brunt? And the corporates in the financial sector. Is it because you could browbeat them and they have a regulator and they have a stake in the financial system, so you could hold a big... then you tried, the pensioners came and said, if you include the pension funds, I will lose money. And then you go back and then...
Take them off.
Now,
individual...
And now you, of course, because you are determined to cut it down to a certain level, You now rope in individual bond makers and make a few tweaks. Individual bond makers too say, why should I? The question we have is that, who pays the bill? It is not about whether
because the bill must be paid.
The bill
Someone must
be
pay,
paid.
but who will pay it?
But who will pay? That's the question we have. And what has happened until now is that somebody has presented a list of those to pay without their consent, without our consent. I mean, think about it. Parliament, who is our representative, Parliament says they know nothing about the debt exchange program. And this comes from the leadership of Parliament. Right? We've interrogated people from the National Development Planning Commission. They also say they don't know. So the question is, there's a major bill to be paid. Because don't be mistaken. Whatever money is saved is a tax from those who lent money to the government to the government. It's a tax. The government owes, can't pay, and it says, you pay. Your bank pay. You are an individual bondholder, pay. Pensioners, you are off the hook. XYZ is off the hook.
The pensioners had to fight for that. So it gives the impression that if you push...
And that is why the initial stance of the individual bondholders is that no, because they've seen it happen, that if you threaten enough, there's some movement. This should be an opportunity to engage, and engage well. And not just engage on the domestic debt program, engage on the alternatives, on cutting debt. You see, the domestic debt program, we can model it and say is going to save us this amount of money per year over the next 15 years. Right? This is the whole point. First of all, do we need to save even that amount of money? Two, that bill that must be paid, who should pay it? It's a national conversation because it's a national problem, right? But it must happen quick.
Okay, so we have limited time. We're wrapping up the conversation, but I'd like to start off with you, with your wrap-up comments, even as Bernice shares hers with you as well. With all of you, Martin, Theo Echampong, and you. Dr. Theo Echampong said that, that it's likely would have an extension of the deadline. At least he shared his thoughts. Do you agree? In terms of the Paris Club, our creditors, there's been no movement there in terms of whether they are going to forgive us any of our debt. What should we expect? Realistically in that regard. And finally, is the IMF program at risk?
Okay, let me start from the easiest one. The IMF program is at risk. The IMF program requires debt sustainability. The way we are approaching debt sustainability now is not going anywhere fast. So in as much as the program was predicated on a domestic debt exchange program, we are at risk. That is clear. The next question is that, the next issue is that I truly believe there are lots of things being done in the background with our foreign debt holders and on debt forgiveness. But everybody is eyeing what we are doing locally. And so this impasse will have an effect. Because you see, you can't, one of the things that we are demonstrating is that we can't manage our affairs. And we can't be held to commitments we've made. And that we make commitments without consulting the constituencies who will be impacted by the commitment. So everybody is looking at this. All right? So a simple answer is the IMF program is at risk, in as much as this domestic debt exchange program was written into the staff level agreement. It's different if it wasn't in there. We are quite clear that it was in there. So the IMF program is at risk because the domestic debt exchange has hit an impasse. Look around you. In other countries, right? This sort of dragging on could take place for even almost a year. Now the doomsday scenario is that we go to a full impact. The IMF says Ghana is not making any movement to meeting its constitution's precedent, and then we start getting cut off from the external markets because we have no money. That is a doomsday scenario, right? Because bear in mind that even as we sit, the next step is that the government will even declare that it cannot meet its 2023 bond payments. So that there's a default, and that's been threatened all over. So even where pensioners are looking at, and so are saying, this is the coupon, the next thing is that the government has already declared, I can't pay foreigners. If we continue, it could say, I can't pay because you don't have the money, you don't have the money. We've got to fix this. So, in wrap up, please, the powers that be, come off your high horses, cut expenditure, and engage with the parties that you want to take the pain.
Your final words, Lawyer Akakpo, even as we wrap up.
Hello, Martin.
Do we have... Please, kindly unmute, sir.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, Bernice. Yes, what's the question, please?
I was asking you, I mean, at this point, you say you're yet to engage with government. Joe Jackson is saying that, look, our IMF program is at risk. You say you don't want to compromise. So, I mean, what is it? Your final words as we wrap up this conversation. What are you looking forward to?
Good. Bernice, what we can do in law, it's still a process in the IMF. So government can go sit down with the IMF and re-look at it, all right, so that they can adjust. Because we've shown that as for individual bondholders, they can't participate in this debt exchange, no. And so this is not the first time. I mean, you sign an agreement, and thankfully it's a staff level agreement. It's not yet been approved by the board, so they can tweak it. It happens all the time. You can agree something today, tomorrow you see that you made a huge mistake, you talk to the other party. Let's not forget, the IMF is also in business. The IMF is also in business. The money is not coming for free. We will be paying interest on it. The IMF also needs us to stay in business. The IMF needs Ghana to succeed so that we'll continue to be a model and continue to be a beacon for the sub-region. So there are some geopolitical considerations that maybe time will not allow us to analyze here. So the point is that, no. Yes, we'll call it a risk, but it doesn't mean the program will go off totally, right? Yes, so government, they know what they're doing. There are a lot of the stuff we can't talk about on radio and TV because when you do, you kind of, you scuttle the program a bit. But what I'm saying is that ultimately, there are a lot of geopolitical considerations in these negotiations. It's not just numbers. IMF needs Ghana to succeed, to continue to be a beacon in this area. You heard what the American embassy said. The ambassador said they were going to put in a word that we must succeed. So that tells you it's not just about numbers. It's a lot more complex than that, all right? So no fears at all. When we take out individual bondholders, it's not that ultimately the program will not succeed. It will. So government just needs to go back to them, and then they would, do some horse trading and do other deals. And at the end of the day, everything will come out perfect. That's how it's always worked. Trust me. The IMF is a business. They are not Father Christmas. They know how to do it in such a way that everybody benefits.
Thank you so much for your time this morning. Lawyer Martin Akakpo there. He speaks for the coalition, and now we are told that they've come together, what he was leading and what Senior Hosi was. So they are now one body, and they are hopefully going to meet government and tell government it's their position of not engaging in a debt exchange program. We also had Dr. Theo Champong and Joe Jackson. We've been having this conversation, quite an interesting one. Well,